Hello and welcome to Behind the Bearcat. This is the podcast where the Northwest Missouri State University Career Services Office chats with Northwest faculty, students, staff, and alumni to hear about their career journey and how they became Bearcats. I'm Northwest Internship Coordinator Travis Klein.
And I'm Hannah Christian, Assistant Director of Career Services.
And today we are joined by Jason Offutt, who is a senior instructor for the School of Communication and Mass Media. Thanks for being here, Jason.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
On this snowy day.
Yes.
If you're listening to this in July.
Yes, it is not July weather today, for sure.
All right, so you're a senior instructor in communication and mass media. So are you communication or mass media?
I'm mass media. I teach journalism.
All right.
A lot of writing courses and photojournalism.
Okay, so can you give me an example of some of the courses that you teach? The names of the courses.
I teach professional media writing, which is a course designed to fix all the grammar problems, spelling, punctuation problems that students come in with. And I teach reporting, photojournalism. I also teach some sports classes, sports reporting and sports photography. I've got a background in all this. I was a newspaper reporter and editor and photographer for 17 years. So everything I teach, I've already done.
All right. I love this. I love jumping right in. So back all the way, rewind.
Right,
back
that's okay.
All the way up.
Like your first 5 questions, I just blew out of the water.
That's all right.
So what was your first job?
My very first job, when I went to college, I'd always wanted to write. And to write creatively. And I wanted to be on the radio. And I was a broadcasting and film major, and I told all my friends, because they'd like, you want to write for a newspaper, right? And I said, I've never in my life write for a newspaper. It's not going to happen. And my very first job out of school was writing for a newspaper.
What about back up? What about your very first job ever? Like when you were 14, 15?
I shoveled hog manure and drove a tractor because I grew up on a farm.
So see, there you go, out of humble beginnings, right?
Right.
What made you want to write?
I don't know.
Did you always want to write?
I remember when I was 9 or 10, I told my parents, I want to be a writer when I grow up. I want to write novels. And I got the brush on the head, isn't that cute? Now go be an accountant or something. But no, I'd always wanted to. And here's some writing advice for people. I always wanted to write, and I was always the best writer. I knew I was the best writer in my high school. And when I went to college and took creative writing, I was the best writer in my creative writing classes. And I thought, and I also got a magazine article published while I was in college. So I'm like, this is easy. Yes. I don't have to work on this because I'm already good. And then I didn't get anything published outside of a newspaper for 20 years. So the big lesson is don't get cocky and work on making yourself better.
That's really good advice for any major.
For anything, yeah.
Okay, so let's back all the way up to the farm. So where are you originally from?
I'm from Orrick, Missouri. That's Orrick. It's not spelled like the vacuum. It's a town of about 800 people. I grew up on a farm outside of it, and we raised almost everything. We had hogs, cattle, sheep, chickens, turkeys.
Did you go to a small school, a big school? What type of school?
My class was one of the biggest graduating classes in about 20 years, and we had 36 people.
So comparable to the schools around this area, the
outlying schools. Yeah.
I gotcha.
My graduating class was 30, so very similar.
Okay. Yeah, Orrick was about the size of Burlington Junction, maybe just a smidge bigger, but not much.
Okay, you're working on the farm. You're going to high school. Writing is easy for you. Where did you go to college, and how did you pick your college?
Wow, do you really want to? I don't know if I should tell why I picked my college, but why not?
Northwest's colors were green. My favorite color was green. That's how I picked Northwest.
Right,
so,
the opinions expressed in the Behind the Bearcat podcast in no way reflect Northwest Missouri State University, its affiliates, or partners.
Okay, so
now you're welcome to say it.
Thank you. All right. I picked Central. I went to Warrensburg. I went to the enemy. Right. So the reason I went, a friend of mine who was a couple of years older, he went to Central. I have no idea why he picked there, but I went to visit him, and he was in a fraternity. I drove to Central from home. I was 16. Why my parents let me drive at 16 to a college town and spend the weekend in a fraternity house, I have no idea.
Sounds like a teenage comedy from the 90s.
But yeah, that's exactly it. So yeah, one of the first things we did is throw one of the frat brothers' beds out the window of the third floor.
Yes.
And then we went to the street where all the libations were served, and I was 16 and I got served, and I'm like, I'm going to school here. So everybody listening who's not in college and is trying to pick, do the opposite. Okay, do your research, which is something that's terrific here. Is the students that I talk to, why'd you come? Well, and it's the best school for what I want to do, and I'm like, good for you.
Good decision making.
That's a great. You weren't me. Yeah.
So what did you start out? Did you start out as a writing major, or what did you major in when you went to college?
I majored. I didn't declare a major until I was a junior. Yeah, because I was following the D-Day from Animal House. 8 years of college down the drain. So I was majoring in broadcasting and film, and I wanted to be on radio, and I did some of that while I was in college, and I found out it wasn't for me, and so I wanted to do TV. I had an internship at Channel 9, and it was a lot of fun, but then I got my job at a newspaper because I didn't want to move, and that was the only thing open, and I found out I really, really liked it. Not just the getting in the news, but writing every single day, getting, practicing what I wanted to do really with my life, which was put words together and tell stories. And I was getting,
and you're doing that every day.
I was
repeatedly.
getting paid to do it, paid to practice and get better. It was at that point that I decided, doing something a lot and actually working on making my writing better was where I needed to go. And I had a lot of fun.
So how did you search for that job? How did that job find you?
Oh, well, it was pretty easy. My mom said, "Hey, Jason," she picked up the local paper and said, "They're looking for a reporter here at the local newspaper. You need to get a job and move out of my house." So yeah, that was it.
Okay, was this the paper did you spend the whole time at what paper was it?
Okay, it was the Richmond, Missouri Daily News. At the time, it was daily. I think it's a couple times a week now, but that's how things go.
All papers, yeah.
Yeah, it was close. It was the next town over, and I fell under the wing of a man who was 78 years old and had worked at the paper since he graduated from college.
For 75 of those years.
Yeah. He was for at least 50 years he'd worked there, and I was smart enough to know that this guy's been there and done that with about everything, so I need to pay attention to what he's telling me. But yeah, that was it. And you said, is that the only paper? When it comes to the newspaper industry, the rule of thumb, and I tell my students this, is keep your resume up to date, because media people move all the time. Usually, people like me will start small, and then, hey, a bigger opening happened, I'm going to go there. Oh, there's an opening at a bigger paper, so I'm going to go there, and then work your way up. And that's how the things usually work.
Gotcha. Yeah. So how long were you there, Richmond Daily News, and then where'd you go next?
I was there 2 years. I went for about a year to nearby Carrollton, Missouri, and then I left and went back to Richmond. They'd offered me something bigger, and from there I went to Liberty, Missouri, Marshall, Missouri for about 4 months, where I met my wife, so I'm glad I went there. And then I spent 8 years at the Examiner in Independence.
So talk to me about what did you develop after you left college that you didn't have the opportunity, or you didn't understand, or you didn't know that you didn't have in college? So you know what I'm saying? Like that professional leap, like you're doing this is your bread and butter.
Right. Well, I learned how to take notes. So I really did.
The
in
importance
college,
of taking notes.
Yeah,
right?
all my notes, I had drawings of like Conan the Barbarian and things and sports cars on my notes. But I learned how to listen, because people a lot of times just hear. Well, that doesn't do you any good. How to listen is to be able to critically think while somebody's talking to you and put the pieces together in a coherent fashion. And I learned how to do that. I learned how to cut a lot of the fat out of my writing. Because, I mean, if you look at just a piece of raw writing, I look at it as a piece of meat. And, let's cut these words out. Well, let's cut that fat out. And here, you know what? What's left is something that's really palatable. So I learned how to do that. And one of the things that has helped me a lot, because I also write fiction, is the quotes. It's listening to different people talk and being able to quote them accurately. And that has really helped me out with dialogue because,
that's what you do when
right,
you dialogue.
Exactly. I spent 17 years really focusing on what people said and how they said it. And that's really helped me out a lot.
So did you write fiction on the side while you were writing for the paper, or was that hard to write two different types of writing?
Oh my gosh. No, yeah, it was really hard. It's not just the two different types of writing. It's that newspapers generally will, your job's from, is 8 hours a day. That's what they tell you. But the truth is it's more than 8 hours a day. And, under deadline, you're really stressed and then the deadline's over, but you still got to work on stuff for tomorrow because when you wake up and come to work, there's a deadline again. I learned how to drink lots and lots of coffee in a short period of time. But
or use your coffee consumption wisely.
Yes, it's I also learned, with deadlines is to, put things together quickly. Because, people will complain of writer's block. I don't usually get writer's block because here we got 17 years of me, I got to have this done at this time. So
every week we got to have it done. We got to have it done. We got to have it done.
Yeah, but okay.
Every day. If
right.
you're on a daily paper.
Because I was on a daily for most of the time that I worked. So it was, every single day. You've got to have this done. You got to have it done now. And I don't care if you can't think of something. You will. Just put your fingers on the keyboard and it's going to happen. Yeah.
So how did you mentioned writing fiction on the side and things like that. How did you go about the process of taking that from your writing to you're getting it published, it's getting out there to where people can consume it?
Okay, yeah, the fiction on the side, I was getting off on the working all this stuff in a newspaper, and I didn't answer that question. I didn't have time because by the time I got home from the newspaper, I just wanted to turn the TV on, eat dinner, and veg out. And so I didn't have time to do anything extra. But, here at teaching, I've got summers. The first number of books that I wrote were, because my 16th is coming out this summer. Most of the books that I've written are nonfiction. So what I've done with those is I've just used my journalism skills. I have a topic. I know what I want to write about. I go out and interview people who've experienced things.
Do some research on it,
exactly.
Compile everything.
Yes.
together.
I mean, I've been, people now, a lot of people just think, I'm just going to research it on the internet. No, you still need to go, into libraries. You need to go into courthouses. You need to look at all these, old documents. And I did quite a bit of that. So my first books, even though they were on ghosts and things like that, I did it as a journalist. I interviewed them. I did historic research on the place where they experienced what they experienced, and I went there to experience it myself. So my first number of works were just normal things. When I started writing fiction, when I started writing novels, it was different only in the research was different. Because, and this is, I don't ever want to get in trouble with the law, because as soon as they look at my search history, I'm toast. Because I wrote a horror novel, and the villain made homemade pipe bombs with homemade timers. I had to look all that up.
Because you don't know how you don't know how to make it realistic unless you have some background. Right?
Exactly, and I don't have that kind of background. So I had to look that up. When it comes to how long does would a person last, until they bled out if their hand got cut off? Well, I asked somebody in the medical field about that, but, so there is research that goes on with fiction, because even though I'm writing about made up things, it's got to feel and sound real to the reader, or they're not going to believe, they're not going to fall into that, this could be real.
Let's go back to, you're working at the paper in Independence, right?
Right.
did you come here from that position?
Right.
Where did you jump off into teaching versus actually working at the paper?
Okay, my last few years, my last 3 years at Independence, they were wanting to start a couple of specialty publications. One was a monthly sports magazine, and another one was a monthly entertainment magazine. And they asked me to create the entertainment magazine, which I did. It was called The X Entertainment Monthly, and so that's what I did my last 2 years. It was a lot of fun, but I still helped out on the daily newspaper, and I'd hit a wall. I just mentally, I just wasn't, I wasn't there anymore. And I decided to go back to school because I had in the back of my head, I'd always wanted to teach. And
At a college?
At a college. And, except for I wanted to be one of those teachers who'd been there, done that, instead of a number of teachers that I had who'd just been in school the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
So and I'd been there and done that. So I went back to school, got my master's, and
What school did you go to?
For my master's?
Yeah.
Central, the same one I got my bachelor's from. I got better grades this time. Yeah. Well, it was funny how I ended up teaching here, because I had recently, fairly recent, before the job was open here, I reconnected with the very first editor I had ever had at that newspaper in Richmond back when I graduated from college, and he was teaching here. And I came up, he invited me up to talk to a few of his classes, and I don't know if he was seeing how I handled students and seeing how I lectured, because, not too long after that, he said, "Jason, I've got a new job and I'm leaving this summer, and the job's going to be posted. You might want to apply for it." And I did, and had great interviews, and hey, here I am. It's been 15 years.
Wow. Talk to me about the first 2 years of teaching. How was that transition? How did you manage that? How was that different from going from being in the actual profession to teaching about it?
Well, I had a number of issues. One, I hated public speaking. I got really, really nervous. And here I got a class with, 22 kids in it. Oh, God. And then my next class after that, I had 60. So blowing my mind. It didn't take me very long to get comfortable talking in front of people. It's really not a big deal, especially when I knew in my head that I know so much more than they do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so they got to listen to me because I know what I'm talking about. But for like the first 5 years I worked here, I had imposter syndrome.
Sure.
I'd walk out to my car thinking, my gosh, am I really doing this? I mean, who said that I was a college teacher? Really? But that passed. My very first class was reporting, and the teacher that I replaced had been here for quite a while, and I walk into the classroom, and one of these students, her name's Stephanie. She worked at ABC in Des Moines for a long time. But anyway, she looked at me and she goes, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I'm your teacher." "No, you're not. My teacher is this teacher. I don't want you." That was my very first class. Like,
Welcome to Northwest. Yeah.
Welcome. Yeah, welcome.
So imposter syndrome went away.
So
you found your stride.
It went away. Yeah. And
did you start writing the first summer after you taught? So that first year, did you start writing fiction in the summer?
Well, no, I still wrote nonfiction. I love writing nonfiction. I love talking to people about their experiences because I'm a storyteller. I tell people's stories, but I have to know them first. Yeah. So no, I wrote 5 nonfiction. No, then I had 6. I think I had written 6 or 7 nonfiction books before I wrote my first novel. But I worked on those nonfiction books during the summer. That's what my wife and kids knew. That's what he's doing this summer.
He's still working, yeah.
And I wrote a travel book one summer. I drove to Canada on US 71 just to buy some Canadian beer and bring it home. That was the premise of the whole thing. But I wanted to drive up 71 because it goes to Fort Francis, Ontario, just to see all the cool, kooky, historic places between here and there. But anyway, that's just that was more nonfiction. So it took a while for me to think, I am not getting any younger at all. and I've always wanted to write novels, so I probably better start this. So, and it was 2013 when I got my first novel published.
So how do you go from writing a nonfiction book to getting it published? If I'm a student or maybe a faculty or a staff member who just is like, I would like to write a novel.
All right, so it's really easy. It's not really easy. And this is what people don't want to hear. Your first novel or your first book, it's going to suck really bad. All right, I got mine out of the way, and it was terrible. But what you need to do and focus on early on is practice. You know, somebody will play baseball all their life, you know, from Little League on, and understand how good practice is. You know, I won't be able to hit that, you know, hanging curve until, you know, I practice. But when it comes to writing, people think, you know, I've known the English language.
I've written a paragraph.
Yeah, you know, I've done this before. It should be easy. And it's not. I mean, read and then write things and have people read them and tell you what's wrong with it, and then write it again and write it again and write it again. So there's a lot of buildup to actually starting to put things down for a book. The hardest thing that any writer starting off has is finishing it, period. People will start working and they'll get 10,000 words into it, and then they don't know what to do next, so they'll abandon it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. When I wrote my first book, I had 5 10,000 word
pieces, right?
Pieces sitting in a drawer. But I'm like, okay, I just got to force myself to do this. So finishing it is tough. Setting a whole bunch of small goals is vital for a book. Because if you think I'm going to write 100,000 word novel,
you're not going to do it in one sitting.
That's a lot. Okay, I might write 1,000, 1,500 words a day. They add up, but it takes a while. But so writing's not the hard part. Writing's the easy part. Okay, it's after the writing when you have to revise it. That's where the fun starts. That's the hard part, is making sure everything makes sense.
You didn't introduce a character in chapter 3 and then he just vanishes. Right.
Exactly. That stuff happens all the time. And it happens to people who've been published a lot. I just had a discussion with an editor for my novel that's coming out this summer. And she's like, okay, you mentioned this in like chapter 4, and I was hoping it would come up again, and it didn't. And I'm like, now that you mention it, I meant for it to come up again. It just didn't happen. So, I mean, that's a common thing to happen. But after the writing is over, there's a ton of work.
So do you do revision? So how do I find an agent? Do I find a publisher? How do I start putting my work out there? So say I have a good chunk of stuff or something I thought that I may have written or revised. What do I do next?
Okay, if it's just a chunk of something, stop right there and finish it.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, nobody's going to look at anything you've written until it's
a
done.
Finished thing.
Right. And then I've always had people say, Jason, you have an agent? You have an agent? Oh, you got to have an agent. No, I don't have an agent. Because to begin with, it really frustrated me. Because agents don't talk to people unless they've got a book published, but most publishers won't publish a book unless you got an agent. So it's this weird
circle of death.
Yeah. I finally got agents to start talking to me, but you know, I've been getting books published on my own, so I don't have to give anybody else a cut, which I'm really cheap and like money. So any penny I can get a hold of, I will. So yeah, it's agents out the door. Before you even think of a publisher, finish the book, find what the industry calls beta readers, which are people who will read your raw work and tear it apart for you, and they will tell you what's wrong with it.
Did you have friends read it? How did you find people to read it?
Well, the thing is, I didn't have a beta reader until I started writing my novels. Everything else I'd written. My wife, who was a journalism major here, is a great copy editor, and she always just edited my stuff, and it got published. But the novels are a lot more complicated because different storylines and everything. So I've wanted more people, and she doesn't want the pressure. So I got a number of friends that I knew would tell me to my face if something was awful, because they tell me when other things are awful. So I mean, that's good. So
Okay,
yeah.
So they beta read, they tear it up.
They tear it
go
up.
back in there and stitch it together.
Stitch it together. I also end up reading it at least 5 times. I like to read it and put it in a drawer for at least a month. Longer, but I usually can't stand it because I want to get it out now. And yeah, I'll read it. I'll go through it at least 5 times and make corrections, and then I'll put together a package of a cover letter, a synopsis, a page synopsis, a 1-word synopsis of the novel, and then research publishers that publish the kind of thing that I just wrote.
I just want to say shout out to the cover letter here. Mm-hmm. Everybody in our office complains, like, we don't know about cover letters. We don't know why we would need to write a cover letter. Can you explain why you would include a cover letter with your work?
Okay, the cover letter of not just my work, but for if you're looking for a job, you want somebody to look what comes after the cover work. In my case, it's a book. In if you're looking for a job, in your case, it's you, right? Exactly. There, you want them to look at your resume. You want them to look at your portfolio, and if your cover letter is not crafted the way the industry wants it to be crafted, if you don't do a good enough job selling who you are and what you can do for them, they're not going to look at your resume. They might look at your resume, but they're not going to look at your portfolio. They're
not going to interview.
They're not going to call you in for an interview. You're right. Yeah. So I'm selling my books. If you're looking for a job, you're selling yourself. So the cover letter is a vital piece, and I hate writing them so much. He's
a writer, and he doesn't like.
I would rather write a 100,000 page novel than I would writing a 1-page cover letter. They're hard, but they're necessary. They're so necessary.
Well, it's amazing how many industries use them too. Because with the Chiefs making the Super Bowl, has happened recently when we're recording this. Patrick Mahomes' cover letter with the draft came out, like as a college player wanting to be drafted, and it's a cover letter just like you'd use for a job, but it's to a sports team. So it's not just you only do this if you're going into business for a traditional 9-to-5 job. Like cover letters are all over the place. So.
Right, and in all places, again, you're selling yourself. Yeah. So, and they've got to sparkle, and not only do they have to sparkle brighter than the other 400
cover letters
that these people are reading.
I hire people, and I know for a fact that probably only got 200 cover letters. So so for example, when I hire, if you don't have a cover letter, you pretty much dropped off right away. Because I ask you to submit one, but
that's something else that I do that a lot of I got on Twitter. I don't like social media; it drives me crazy. But I got on I dumped my Facebook back in August and don't regret that for a second. But I got on Twitter to follow publishers, agents, other authors, editors, just for advice and to get an editor says something cute about her dog. And I do too. Hey, maybe they'll remember my name. But they give a lot of advice. And yeah, the cover letter's always there and following the directions. Okay, like you said, include a cover letter. Yeah, because if you're submitting something to somebody, they will have listed what they want, and you had better hit each one of those exactly how they want it.
So do you print off your book in a print manuscript format with your print cover letter, with your print 1-word synopsis? Do you send it to the post office and mail it? Or do you electronically submit that?
I haven't done that. I haven't mailed one, 8 years maybe more. Everyth's electronic now.
Submissions?
Yeah, which is great because, man, if you're mailing...
That's a lot of postage.
390-page manuscript. Yeah, that the postage can add up.
Gotcha. So then you wait, right? And wait to hear back.
Right. It depends on the publisher. Some publishers, they'll say, we will try to get back with you in 2 weeks. Sometimes, more realistically, it's 3 months. There are some, I heard back from a publisher for a novel, and I had sent it to them a year ago, maybe. Year and a half. It has been forever since I sent it out to them. I had frankly forgot I sent it to them. So I had to send them back sorry, it's been published by somebody else now. I have the book right here in my hand.
And then you bask in your glory. So when the publisher says, hey, we might have something here, do they come back and give you edits, revisions, feedback on it? What do they usually do after that?
Right. Okay. When you send it into a publisher, when you don't have an agent, the manuscript goes into what's called a slush pile. So probably an intern will go through the slush pile, and if they like something, they'll submit it to an acquisitions editor. The acquisitions editor is the person who reads it and thinks, I think we should publish this. I'm going to take it to the editorial board. So more people read it, and the board may decide, yes, we're gonna go with this. When it goes to that, the author is contacted by the boss, and they say, either we want to offer you a contract or we want to talk with you first. So you might have a Skype conversation or a telephone conversation, because a lot of publishers like to know who they're getting in with, and if they like you, if you're personable, they know you're going to be easy to work with.
They're kind of like an employer. Only you're selling their book to them.
Exactly, yeah. And so after that, and if they like you, they'll offer you a contract. You might need to negotiate, well, I want a higher percentage of royalties. And then after that, you do the contract signing, mail it back and forth, and then it goes to the copy editor, who goes through and looks for plot problems, character development problems, and even some line edits, like you spelled this wrong, you used the wrong the wrong effect here, and you correct that, and the author's the one who makes the corrections, because you can take or leave their corrections. Generally, if you leave some of their corrections, they don't like you too well. So I usually make all the corrections, but I get to word it in the way I want to. And then it'll go to another editor who gives it, a last read through. It goes to the composition people who make it look like a book. And usually there's an artist who will create the book cover. And yeah, by that point,
do you get to see proofs of the cover before?
I got to see proofs of my cover.
Do you get production advance copies of your book to read through it, look at it?
Yeah, I sure do. Yesterday, I got book covers to take a look at, and they gave me 3 options, and I liked all 3 of them. But yeah, that's and simplistically, that's the way it works.
So, and I think one of the things that we don't think about, so we're talking about this, that there are people out there who do this for a job. So like your job is to design book covers, or your job is to be a copy editor for a publishing house, or your job is to be Joe intern. Well, that's not your job, it's your internship, but Joe intern who wades around in the slush pile, right? Like these are opportunities that are out there in areas, students or people who don't have a job. Like look there, those are jobs people are doing.
Those are jobs. There are people who really like to correct other people. Okay, that's what editors do. Okay, so there are book editor jobs out there. You like to read books. You like science fiction. Hey, I want to apply for this job at this publishing house because they're
going to pay you to read science fiction.
Exactly. Not just are they going to pay me to read science fiction, they're going to pay me to correct these people on what's wrong. And so, yeah, there's jobs out there. For graphic designers, there are people who design books. That's what they do, design book covers, and they do art for the inside. A book that I had that came out last March, it's called Chasing American Monsters. And I went through every single state, and I found the famous monsters and some odd monsters that a lot of people don't know about from each state. And they hired an artist to draw a picture of, a Bigfoot or a lake monster, or for each state. So I've got 50 illustrations in there. So there's tons of jobs for people out there in the publishing industry.
Excellent. So one last thing I want to bring up. I know a lot of your work is centered around supernatural elements, paranormal, the occult. So has that always been something you're interested in? Is that something you kind of fell into?
No, that's something I've been interested in that since I was really little. I grew up watching reruns of Star Trek, Lost in Space, Twilight Zone, I never watched one episode of Mr. Rogers. I never watched any Sesame Street because if, something creepy was on, I was all over that. When the Scholastic Book Club would have the, the color, order forms, man, I was getting books on Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, ghosts. So I've been in love with that ever since I was a kid. And when it comes to the newspaper industry, they don't write a lot about that.
Right.
Yeah. There have been times throughout American history where they did, back when the spiritualist movement was going on in the 1800s and early 1900s, seances and ghosts were reported in
They had their
newspapers.
section, right? Like sports, and then we have like the monster section,
The monster
right?
section. Well, and then we had throughout the late 40s up until the early 60s, it was UFOs. They were on the front page of, the LA Times. And then it was Bigfoot up until probably the mid to late 70s. But when I was in the industry, we didn't write about that sort of stuff. And then, wait a second, I'm not in the industry anymore. I'm teaching and I've got a few months in the summer. I'm going to write about ghosts. Yeah.
So we always have like tips and tricks kind of at the end. You've shared a lot of good information, but as someone who sees student work or even other professionals' work, tips and tricks for finding a job, tips and tricks for improving your writing, communication, any tips and tricks, anything in your life.
Well,
you can share with us.
for communication, the main issue with people is to don't be scared. All right, you can talk to people on the radio. That's okay because you're talking to a person. Okay, you're not talking to the people. I was on Coast to Coast AM twice, but the first time I was on it, I was like, wait a second, this is on 500 radio stations, and there's millions of people listening to me right now. It kind of freaked me out. By the time I got around to the second time, it wasn't that big of a deal. So, one of the main things through anything people are going to do in life is don't be scared. Because going for an interview, who's not nervous? All right, everybody's nervous going to an interview, speaking in front of people. But if you can just find a way to relax, that makes everything easier. When it comes to writing, one of the main things is just the practice. Practice makes perfect. Just keep doing it. And I hate practice makes perfect because your writing's never going to be perfect. I've had a number of writing students who were really good, but they were under the impression that they could make their writing perfect. I'm like, you can't. You're always going to have a mistake. I was like that until, the deadline hit me. And I
you realize you just got to push it out,
push it out.
Yeah.
And the funny thing was I thought my writing was perfect back then and it was garbage. So, get over yourself. Don't be scared and practice.
All right. Awesome. Thank you for coming and sharing with us.
All right. I appreciate the invitation.
Absolutely.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, we appreciate you being here for sure. So, all right. That'll do it for another Behind the Bearcat, and we'll talk to you next time. Hey guys, we hope you enjoyed that episode. Don't forget to follow on your podcast platform of choice and on YouTube. Also, click the little notification bell on YouTube so you never miss an upload. And you can follow us on social media on Twitter, Instagram, and we have a LinkedIn page.